One of the most common comments you would get from non-Sony users who have tried Sony cameras for maybe 1 or 2 minutes, or Sony newbies who just got their first Sony camera, is that the Sony menu system is way too confusing. And this is, of course, because of the abundance of items that you can select for many different modes and customization. And anyone who has been shooting with Sony cameras for a while now and they're very happy with what they have, they would agree that the key to mastering that is, of course, customization. The thing is, Sony wants to give you so many options in terms of turning on and turning off certain features, to the point that, of course, it's unavoidable to have so many things inside the menu system. However, what Sony also gives you are a lot of customization options as well as shortcut buttons for you not to have to go into the menu system every single time you use your camera. That way you can make your shooting process much simpler, and you can assign different features that you commonly use to turn them on and off using a single button or dial, and basically just have everything within reach of your fingers. If you're able to do that, you can master shooting and be ultra comfortable with shooting with your Sony camera. So on this video, let's talk about some of the suggestions I would like to make for photographers who want to maximize the custom features of their Sony camera, specifically the Sony A7IV. Now I have right here the Sony A7IV, which I got a couple of weeks ago, and I'm connecting it to the HDMI to capture with my computer so you can get this menu system right here. And later on, I'm going to turn that into full screen. However, this video is not going to be a discussion of every single item on the menu because that's going to take way too long. Of course, the Sony A7IV features the all-new Sony menu system, and I do think there were a lot of improvements compared to the ones we've had from the A7R3 and the A7C. But of course, there's still a bit of familiarization needed to master this menu system. And on this video, I'm going to do a bit of a rundown of some settings that I like to set whenever I get a new camera. This is specifically some suggestions for photography. And later on, I'm going to show you also some of my selections in terms of custom buttons and dial functions, as well as the almighty My Menu that we have on top with that star. Now, the first initial setting I make sure to toggle is, of course, switching on over to RAW. And I mainly shoot RAW and JPEG because I never really ever max out my 64 gig SD cards. And that's because I'm a landscape photographer and I don't do a lot of burst shooting. I don't usually touch aspect ratio since I'm shooting in RAW. And of course, you can also already set the file format for video right here, and as well as other settings for movies. There's also the Super 35 shooting right here. And I always make sure to turn off long exposure noise reduction. This is something very nice actually. Long exposure noise reduction makes sure that there's less noise on your long exposure photos. However, if you're shooting in a hurry, this will take double the time for each exposure. So you might miss some shots that you want to be taking continually. So I choose to turn this off because most of the time I'm shooting in a hurry. Now we also have high ISO noise reduction, which you can set from low, normal, or off. And you can also select the color space. I just keep it at sRGB. And you can also do lens compensation. And you can select distortion compensation when you shoot with a lot of wide angle lenses, as well as chromatic aberration and shading compensation. Now for media, of course, one of the main things that I select is format, because I format my cards every time after I back the files up in my computer. But this is something I would actually put on the My Menu page, so I don't have to go through all those folders just to get to this function. Of course, an important thing to do is to select record media settings and select which kind of file goes to which card. Of course, the A7IV has two SD card slots, and the first slot is actually a hybrid slot that can also take in a CF Express Type A. And so you can segregate your files between photo and video, also between RAW and JPEG, to go to one SD card slot over the other whenever you're shooting with more than one card. Now, it's up to you if you want to change the file settings, the copyright info, if you want to write the serial number on your files, totally up to you. Now, of course, we also have USB streaming right here, which is a function that's very handy in the A7 IV. And very conveniently, in December 2021, they also added this feature on the A7C, which is what I'm using right now for this video, through a simple firmware update. Now, I don't really ever touch drive mode. However, there is a very nice setting that you should know exists in this menu system, and it is self-timer during bracket. Whenever I do bracketed exposures, I usually want a 2-second timer there, and you can select off to 5 or 10 seconds depending on what you want. And this is something I usually like at 2, except when I'm shooting handheld and I'm just run and gun doing some bracketed exposures, and that is when I turn it off. Of course, we also have interval shooting function right here. You can also adjust, of course, which type of shutter you want to use, image stabilization, turn it on and off, adjust and all that, zooming in, and of course the grid display. I particularly like selecting the grid display with a rule of thirds so that I do have a bit of guide, especially when shooting with a lot of verticals, and I keep it at rule of thirds so it's not too overwhelming on the display. Of course, we also have some exposure settings here: exposure compensation, metering, flash, white balance, color tone, and basically something I do access here a lot are picture profiles and creative look. However, I do like to keep these in the function menu to make it more accessible. For the AFMF folder, one important thing I like to touch is, of course, the IAF, to make sure that it's on, so that whenever I do photos and videos, it's very easy to focus on the eyes. And I did try the animal IAF on my dog recently, and it's beyond amazing how it easily tracks the movement of the dog. And of course, you can also select which eye, right or left, in terms of that. You can set it to auto, left or right, depending on that. But I mainly just select auto for this one. And more importantly, I make sure that this setting is turned on. You go to number 4, Focus Assistant, and Auto Magnifier in Manual Focus, and turn it on. Basically, this means that whenever you use manual focus, as you turn the focus ring, it will magnify on where your AF point or your selected focus point is, and magnify that to give you the assurance that you're focusing on point. Now, peaking display is actually very important. This is something important whenever you're shooting in manual. So you can turn this on for photo and video. And I like to keep the setting in mid because I don't want to be overwhelmed by the highlights. And also, I like to keep it the color in red to make sure that I can see which part is being highlighted. As for the other folders, you can also customize your playback settings and also the network settings, connecting to a smartphone, transfer, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and I'm pretty sure if you use these functions, you've already figured it out. Now, of course, the most important is this last item on the menu, which is, of course, the main customization part. Specifically, we'd like to go to the item number 3 right here, which is Operation Customize. On this part of the menu, you can customize the dials and the buttons, which can also be segregated between photo and video mode. Now, one very important thing I like to do here is to select this item right here, which is different set for still or movie. And what this does is basically make sure that whenever you switch from photo to video, you're only carrying over the settings that you want to carry over and not affect every other thing. A practical application of this is one mistake I've done quite a few times on other Sony cameras, which is selecting a picture profile for the videos I shoot, then later on switching on over to photo, forgetting that I selected a picture profile, and more importantly, forgetting that it's not set in RAW. And basically that just led to a lot of regret. So you can select aperture, shutter speed, ISO, exposure compensation, white balance, and here picture profile. So I want to make sure that picture profile sticks only for video and I can go back to creative look and raw shooting whenever I am in photo mode. Now let's head on over to customizing the buttons and dials for photo. So we basically have 5 different parts here pertaining to different parts of the camera. And I'm going to do a rundown of basically my personal suggestions or my personal preferences in terms of these buttons. For the AEL button actually, one of the things I'd like to be able to access immediately is shooting in Super 35 because there are lots of times wherein I need to do this. And this is also something I would change in terms of the video shortcuts. And so you can go to image quality and select APS-C S35 / full frame. So when you select that and when you press the upper rightmost button in the rear panel, which is labeled here as number 1, you will switch from APS-C to full frame. Now, even if I always shoot in RAW, I like to have access to creative look. So the AF on button, which is number 2 here, is actually something I set for that. And we can access that through this menu and select color/tone and select creative look. One thing I always want to have access to very quickly is white balance mode because I specifically like to switch from auto white balance to Kelvin. So this is something I've already selected in tinkering that. But basically I selected that for number 3, which is the C1 button right below the viewfinder. Now over to the leftmost side, we have the C3 button. Specifically, I like using this for the focus magnifier. This is again whenever I shoot in manual focus, and this is usually when I shoot astrophotography and also when I shoot with manual focus lenses. So I want to be able to access the focus magnifier very quickly even if I haven't turned the focus ring. And for number 5, or the C4 button, or the delete button actually, I prefer to select the self timer during bracket. And this means that whenever I press this, I'm given the option of selecting off to 5 or 10. So you don't really have to go through the deep folders just to get to this setting. For the second set of buttons on the rear part of the camera, most of these are actually already selected. However, there are some buttons that are left blank, so you can also make use of those. For number 1, the joystick is actually also a customizable button, and I like to keep it the way it was set in factory, which is at focus standard. Number 2 was actually left blank, so I select this, and I prefer to set this actually on display my menu. And you can access that through the yellow folder, which is for the extra settings, and select display my menu. So when you press that, you can go straight to my menu and access whatever you put there. Number 3, I keep it in drive mode. Number 4 is ISO, which is already what Sony put even on the written labels on the camera. And number 5, actually, I select touch operation. So you can simply turn on and off the touch screen whenever you press this button. Now, the top features also 2 customizable buttons. Of course, the first one is the movie record button, and I really don't touch that anymore. However, for number 2, I select the focus area so that it's easier to change my focus area with pressing just that button. Now, you can also, of course, change the focus hold button function, and this is particularly something you should be using if all your lenses have the focus hold button. However, it is optional if you have lenses that don't have the focus hold button. Now lastly, for the dials, I also want to make sure that it's separate when in manual mode and in other modes. Generally, I like to keep the shutter speed on the frontmost dial labeled number 1 here. And this is something most people are used to, of course. And this is generally where your pointer finger rests. And generally, I like to keep the aperture control button on the upper left dial for easier access. And for most other modes, I like to use the custom dial on the right, which is what's new to the A7IV, and keep that at exposure compensation. However, that is useless whenever you're shooting manual mode. So when I use manual mode, I actually like to change that into custom white balance temperature. And that's going to make it a lot easier for me. And one nice thing you can actually do for both modes is change the thumb wheel into ISO control. So you don't really have to press the right button anymore. And there we have it. We have full control of the buttons and dials on our Sony A7IV. Now, another important initial setting that you should be paying attention to is the function menu, because this is your easiest access. And generally, I don't touch this until I find the need to put something else in there. But some of the things I like to keep there are also the drive modes, focusing, the focus area, ISO, the exposure compensation. And one thing I always make sure is here is creative look. For video, instead of creative look, I like to keep picture profile right there. And another thing I want to make sure is there is steady shot, and so I can select steady shot both in photo and video. And especially because I really like the active stabilization on this A7IV when I do videos. So I want to keep it as handy as possible. This is something you should customize to your comfort, so that whenever you're using your camera, you know where to access whatever you want to access. Now lastly, we need to set the My Menu page. And remember, I set this as a shortcut on the center button on my thumb, so I can easily access that. Now, this is where you add the items you need easy access to. So number 1 I like to put there is formatting my SD card. So there's actually so many pages that you can select here, but I generally keep it to just 1 or 2 pages. Now initially, when I first started using Sony cameras, I wanted to put every single thing in the My Menu page. However, familiarizing myself with the custom buttons made me realize that I don't even need to go to the My Menu pages for most of the things I want to access, because I can just press the specific buttons I set them to. So instead, I just selected some of the things I sometimes select or sometimes need to use. Another item I need for this is, of course, interval shooting. I also very much would like to have a shortcut to connecting my smartphone, specifically the smartphone registration. However, if you've tried the smartphone connection on the A7IV, it's so seamless to the point that whenever you turn your camera, it will automatically connect to your phone, just in case you want to turn on Imaging Edge. Nonetheless, I put this item right here. Another must-have item for me here is, of course, USB streaming. One of the reasons why I got the A7IV is because I do a lot of live streams, so this is something that I will be using a lot. And lastly, one thing I also want quick access to is changing the IAF from human to animal to bird. So this is basically what we need there. And when we select that, we have all these. And there we go. Those again were my suggestions for your initial custom settings for your new A7IV. And these are generally some of the things that I commonly use as a landscape photographer, as an architectural photographer, sometimes a travel photographer, and also sometimes a video person. So if you have any questions about the settings, again, I did not go into them one by one, but if you have any questions, leave them down below and I'll try my best to answer your questions and also try my best to locate whatever you're looking for. And if you're new to the channel, my name is Nicco Valenzuela. I'm a landscape and architectural photographer. So this channel is mainly about photography, landscape, architectural, and also a lot of tech that revolves around photography. Thanks for watching.